You are listening to Dodging Divorce Disasters, a podcast where I interview divorce professionals that give you clear guidance, real talk, and smart strategies to help you make better decisions when it matters most. My name is Lori Hawkins. I am a divorce realtor, expert, and your host. I have the privilege of working with these professionals daily, and there is a wealth of knowledge in each episode. Let's get started. I am so excited to have Paulina Havelka with me today. She is an attorney here in the Charlotte area, actually down in Monroe, but you're in the Charlotte area. I am thrilled to have you today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to hop on here with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I want you to fully introduce yourself, where you work, maybe the counties you do, what you do specifically, and we'll go from there.
Yes, ma'am. Paulina Havelka. I am a practicing attorney with Collins Family Law, an elder group. Actually, they started doing elder law as well. That's not my forte, but I have been with them since May of 2025 until December 31st of 2022. I served as a judge for 4 years in Mecklenburg County. I have been licensed since 2005, and I've handled essentially criminal and family matters all the way up until the election in 2018. Now I primarily focus on family.
Wow, that is amazing. So, honestly, I always talk about a fun fact, but that being a judge, that is kind of a fun fact for you because every attorney I have on here is not a judge. So, that is very special and something you should be very proud of.
Thank you very much.
Judge is an elected position, right?
Correct. District court judges are elected for 4 years, and superior court judges are elected for 8 years. Then, of course, you have the Court of Appeals, which are also 8-year terms, as well as the Supreme Court.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you're back doing family law because I know that you're very good at what you do. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that have you as their attorney right now that are glad you're off the judge seat. But it does give you a very unique perspective. You know, even as we discuss things today, you have it not only from the family law attorney side, but you also have seen it from the judge's side also, which I think is just very unique, which makes me just thrilled that you're on here, like I said before. Um, okay, so one of the main reasons, I'm just going to kind of jump right into this because I feel like you're going to have a lot of good information that I want the listeners to be able to hear and take good things away from. Being dodging divorce disasters, the main reason that I do this is because I want the listeners to be able to hear from whatever expert that I'm interviewing. Any of us that work in divorce, the divorce area, we all have crazy stories and we all have seen someone that we've worked with do something, say something in a way that has not turned out well for them. That if they had made another decision or another turn or whatever may be the case, they really could have dodged that divorce disaster, which is I'm hoping will help some people out there do that may be going through the same circumstance that we may talk about today. So share with us, share with me, share with us, something your craziest divorce story and how someone could maybe perhaps avoid that pitfall for what they're going through.
Well, 20 years of practicing family law minus 4 years on the bench, I will tell you that there's plenty of crazy stories to choose
I
from.
bet.
When we talked about this, one of the things that came to mind are protective orders. And the reason that the protective orders came to mind is because they move very quickly. If there's one thing we know about the system, and this is something I commonly say during my consultations, the court system moves month to month. Our lives move day to day. And when you have a protective order filed against you, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be in court within the first 10 days of service, which doesn't really give you a whole lot of time in order to figure out what the next steps are. They should be, how you should address the defending protective order, and how it can impact the equitable distribution, which is the marital It's what I call fancy words for an equitable marital division in North Carolina. So essentially, the equitable distribution the judge determines, classifies, values, and distributes the marital property that you accumulated during the marriage. And in the domestic violence protective order, the judge doesn't distribute, nor does the judge determine what's marital and what's not. However, it can determine on the short term, which to the courts, 1 year is a short term, or it's the permanent order, but it's temporary in nature, in that equitable distributions can take up to 2 to 3 years to be resolved in the court
Wow.
system, whereas the domestic violence protective order will probably be resolved in no time, such as a month, sometimes 2 months. It just depends on whether or not the case needs to be continued, but it does impact how you pay your bills and stay afloat until the final property division that needs to happen under the Chapter 50. Even though I didn't have a crazy story to coincide this with, ironically, I was just retained on 3 protective orders last week.
Oh,
And so
wow.
it was on my mind. It's something that I know happens fairly quickly in the system. It's one of the few things that move quickly in the system. Imperative that you understand the difference between possession and ownership, that you understand that you would still be responsible for half of that mortgage, if not all of it, depending on whether or not you're the only mortgage payer or have been historically during the marriage. And then more importantly, what are the essentially consequences of violating a protective order, which a lot of people are not aware of because it starts out in civil court. But once a protective order is granted against you, any violation of said protective order actually becomes a criminal charge. And so the protective orders are quite powerful in how they're utilized, right? I mean, obviously, the protective order is there because of allegedly something you did that deserved the entry of one,
Uh-huh.
such as calling excessively, showing up at the home after you've already moved out. Any of this occurring in front of the children would result in a short or temporary custody order, which a lot of people aren't aware of as well. And there's a lot of consequences on the short end with the Chapter 50B, which is the protective order, that
Mhm.
impacts the Chapter 50, which tends to move much slower. But unfortunately, whatever happens in that 50B can have long-term effects, and it will affect the Chapter 50 filing that at some point you're going to have to do in order to close out that chapter of your life, close the marital estate, distribute the marital estate. You're back to, the best way for me to describe this is there's a reason why even in churches we have 2 candles that are lit. And then eventually by the end of the marriage ceremony, it turns into one. Well, the law kind of sees it the same way, right? We start at us 2 individuals the moment we sign that marriage certificate. We now become one. And from that day forward, everything we accumulate is essentially viewed as one, even though one could argue it's not in their name. It doesn't matter. If it was accumulated during the marriage, it's marital property, which means it's now this until the judge distributes it and separates it. And so it's the easiest analogy that I can use that is
Mhm.
very common and probably came from initially the views that we had religiously, that, once a couple is married, it's no longer one individual, it's 2 individuals, but seen as one. And the law sees us the same way.
Okay.
The marital property component has to be distributed. It could be mediated and settled, but it has to be distributed before the entry of divorce. And unfortunately, when it comes to the property, it's usually the last thing that a judge typically hears, right? The first things are typically temporary child support, temporary custody, and post separation support, which is spousal support on a temporary basis is determined. That's when the judge can determine the equitable distribution. The reason that plays a role is obviously until we know what you take out of the marriage, and if you were married 20 years, right now you may see yourself as someone who doesn't have a lot, which is probably true if you were a homemaker. However, once that equitable distribution is distributed, you technically walk away with half of the marital estate. And so the spousal support, the alimony could change, the numbers could change, the amount that you receive could change based on the fact that you walked away with a marital estate that is substantial, for example. or a marital state that is essentially non-existent if you never accumulated any, property. And so that's something else that the judge needs to determine the spousal support. So I'm not trying to confuse. I am trying to focus on the protective orders, but I
Right.
do want someone to understand the gravity of how a domestic violence protective order can impact you on the short term and what it means, the difference between obviously possession and ownership. So let's say that you're an individual that has been served with a protective order, owned a home, you've been married 15 years, you've been paying on that mortgage for 15 years, but there's 15 years to go. And as part of the ex parte, which is the temporary order that remains in place until you're served and your permanent hearing is scheduled, she is allowed or he is allowed to stay in the marital residence or take possession of it until the judge decides what, if anything, they're going to do different in the long term. That's
So are you
obviously,
saying they could if they could the other party could be the one that is served the domestic violence orders could be asked to move out and the other spouse can move back in?
well, they've never moved out, but they're able
Oh,
to keep
okay.
possession of the home.
Okay.
Yes. And so, 9 times out of 10, the 50B will also evict someone from their home. So I guess let me give you a scenario. We're married. We had a spat on Saturday. On Monday, I went down to the magistrate's office or the clerk's office. I filled out a protective order. It was granted, and he was served that night. More than likely, he was served inside the marital home. And the moment he was served, he was also evicted from that marital home.
Okay.
More than likely, you were given possession of the marital home. So until that permanent hearing comes up, typically within 10 to 15 days of that first one, you would not be able to go back to your home except for being accompanied by a police officer to retrieve like personal belongings or work-related clothes such as, um, uniforms or something like that. But you're not now allowed to go back to your home and you are no longer in possession of the home. It is something that we would obviously address at the permanent hearing, and the judge can enter the possession of the home for a year because that's how long that permanent order can remain in place. So why did I bring that up? Well, the key word is possession and not ownership. The judge did not say that the house now belongs to her. What the judge said is, we're going to let her stay there for the year while this order is in place. However, the judge never talks about the mortgage payment. And I think this is the most common question that I get. And that is, well, who pays the mortgage while she lives there?
Right.
First of all, it's a bit of a complex question because if you were both working and you both contributed to that mortgage and you're both on that mortgage payment, the good news is that you both have a responsibility to pay that mortgage because you're still co-owners, or I should say owners pursuant to a marriage, which means you own it as one until the
Right.
judge distributes it. However, she's staying there. So why should I pay the mortgage? Well, the problem with that is you are still owner and it means you're still responsible. Now, there is a way to negotiate that and to discuss it pursuant to a Chapter 50 filing, but let's assume there isn't one. The answer is, if you were the breadwinner and you paid that mortgage, at some point down the road, the judge is going to expect that you're going to continue to pay it until there's a decision made by the judge as to what to do with it. So remember, in the documents, in the protective order, all you're going to see is she remains and she still has possession of the home, uh, and you're no longer allowed to return to that home. The judge made no call and cannot make a call as to who's going to pay for the mortgage. That is a Chapter 50 action, not a Chapter 50B action. So typically what you see happen is the Chapter 50 actions get filed, right? Because they're typically in an emergency context. And then at some point, you either have the wife or the husband talking to an attorney that would more than likely say, listen, we need to file a Chapter 50 because that is where the money decisions are going to be made, not in the Chapter 50. However, you need to be made aware that the judge could extend that possession for a year before another judge is going to lay their eyes on it and decide what, if anything, they're going to do in the Chapter 50. So I think what I would want for anyone to take away from today, because I know we're limited on time and I'm happy to join you any other time to talk about this. But the biggest thing is, please talk to a lawyer once you're served with a protective order. It is important for you to understand what the allegations are behind you, what the defenses, against you, what the defenses are, if any, and more importantly, how is this going to impact you on the, I say long term, but I mean really short term, before you file that Chapter 50, before we actually move in the according, in the proper court to determine what, if anything, is going to happen to that marital state. The DVPOs, the protective orders, can have a lot of ramifications and consequences that most people are not aware of. One of those is you can be evicted from your home. You can be ordered not to return to the home. Number one and biggest consequence that I think most people are not aware of. And unfortunately, they get served. And the first thing they do is contact opposing party. Well, guess what? That's a violation of the protective order and you could be arrested for doing it. So no, your first reaction should not be to contact the person who filed, but rather contact a lawyer and go and sit down with them, because you need to understand the ramifications and consequences of an end of a protective order.
Okay, my mind's about to explode right here.
Sorry.
Let me read. No, 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 no. It is so much good information. I just want to make sure the listener is getting all this. Okay, I'm going to back up because those of us that are not attorneys, I want to make sure I understand, because if I understand, hopefully the listener is going to understand. Okay.
Right.
All right. Let's say that you are in a marriage, and okay, let me even back up more than that.
Sure.
Tell me again, what type of actions warrant a domestic violence protective order? What
So,
can one spouse do to the other that can initiate that order?
well, primarily physical abuse, bodily injury. There is sexual assault and any sexually related charges that would also qualify for a protective order. And I'm being very broad.
Right.
The third, which is the two most common, are obviously bodily injury. The other one is harassment. Now, harassment does require more than one incident, but that also depends on the dynamics of the relationship. So, say, for example, if there is a history of domestic violence and bodily harm prior, and then you decide to text message me and tell me that you're going to kill me, that alone could be a reason or grounds for domestic violence protective order. So the more, for the purposes of the victim, the more you put into that complaint, the better, because you are not allowed to then bring up things outside of the complaint when you're in front of the
Okay.
judge. So if there was a history, but you didn't talk about it, and then all you wrote in that complaint is they threatened me, there's a good chance it's not going to be granted, because the judge is not going to allow you to talk about past incidents. But we both know that more than likely the reason you're afraid is because of past incidents
Right.
that happened between you two. The more detail, the better. But harassment is, calling somebody, 15, 20 times a day, calling their work, calling their cell phone, texting them, 1:30, 3:30 in the morning. Clearly, more than likely, most people are intoxicated and they, 9 times out of 10 may say things they don't mean. But if you're calling or harassing or texting 20, 30 times in the middle of the night, that is harassment as well.
What about verbal abuse? Can
So
you get a domestic violence protective order for a verbal abuse?
verbal abuse and emotional abuse is very hard. It's hard to prove. So the answer is it is in a category of abuse, but I will tell you that it's extremely hard to prove.
Okay.
So,
Okay. That's good to know.
would I recommend that somebody or a woman gets treatment to sort of empower her and build her back up from somebody breaking her down over a period of time of calling her an idiot every day? The answer is yes. Would that qualify for a protective order? No.
Okay. Tell me the difference. You hear restraining order a lot. What is the difference between a restraining order and a domestic violence protective order?
There isn't one.
There isn't one. That's the same
They're
thing.
interchangeable. Yes.
Okay. Right.
Protective orders pursuant to domestic violence are B actions. And they're all that entire chapter is domestic violence. C is the no contact orders between strangers. So again, there could be harassment by, say, a neighbor. It wasn't something I touched on today because we were primarily talking about
Right.
marital
Of course.
property, but
Hmm.
there are protective orders between strangers as well, and that's chapter 50C. So just to kind of help somebody understand, all of the marital statutes related to custody, child support, spousal support, and marital property division, such as the equitable distribution, are all pursuant to chapter 50. Domestic violence is chapter 50B. No contact orders between strangers are chapter 50C. So they're all
Okay.
kind of related. They're all in chapter 50, but there are subsections.
I gotcha.
And
All right.
and yes,
All right. So
there
let
are
me,
two types of protective orders.
okay. So, from what if I'm understanding you correctly, if you are in a marriage and there has been some type of abuse, whatever, you do not have to contact an attorney to go down to file a complaint. You can do that on your own.
You can always file on your own. I will just tell you that, and maybe this should have been the fun fact that we started with. I started out as a courtroom clerk 20 years ago, actually a little longer than that now. And what actually inspired me to go to law school was the fact that people were coming in saying they don't want an attorney. And I learned very quickly as a clerk who had no court background prior to taking the job that it is another language. It is a very foreign place to most people, and if you don't understand what you're doing, you could suffer consequences that you would normally not suffer if you had counsel. So one thing I will say was a life lesson for me. I will never walk into a courtroom without a lawyer myself. And I'm not foolish enough to ever represent myself, whether my experience has been as an attorney as well as a judge. Why? It's too close to home. I am too emotionally involved, and I will not be thinking objectively and clearly the way I need to in order to properly move the case in the direction that needs to move, rather than being led by emotion, which 9 times out of 10 leads us to bad consequences to the court system in and of itself.
Okay. So, a domestic violence order
But
is the
yes, you can
main.
file on your own. I apologize, Lori. Yes, you can
Yeah.
file.
No. No, that's good. So if you file it on your own, what is the time limit? How quickly are they evicted
It depends
typically?
on how quickly they're served. Domestic violence protective orders, the sheriffs are kept quite busy. They do try to serve them as quickly as possible. It could be as quickly as that night. Unfortunately, it could be that they were never served. I've had, clients that did not know where the individual fled to after their fight or argument. And they went down, they filled out an application for a protective order. They got a protective order and they were never able to be served because they never provided, the other side with a forwarding address.
They just disappeared.
Correct. So it really depends on the sheriff and how quickly they could serve you. Because the moment you're served is the moment you're made aware that you're not to return to the residence and that you're no longer, that's a violation of the protective order if you were to go back.
All right, let me ask you this too. Is this ever abused in that people are wrongly accused of this to get them out of the house?
Absolutely. Our system was founded on good faith, Lori, and I still like to believe that majority of us see it that way. Unfortunately, there are some that just abuse it, and as long as I have defended as well as prosecuted these, not to mention hear it during COVID, literally every day for a year. Yes, absolutely. There are individuals that abuse the system in every which way. And sometimes it really is hard to, decipher who is more credible than the other. I mean, they're very crafty and good liars out there, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Satan's good at his work. So, I'd like to think that as a judge, we have a good filter and that, obviously if you have a good attorney, that they're going to do a good job litigating your case. But yeah, I mean, we make mistakes, and somebody may be more persuasive, even though they put their hand on a Bible and don't light up on fire when they lie.
Right. But what you were saying also is the person that was served the domestic violence order, protection order, they are the ones that really need to contact the attorney ASAP. Not necessarily the one that's sitting in the house but the one that actually got evicted, because it is going to, if the next steps are actually divorce, then his eviction from the house and this order is going to directly impact
The divorce.
his ED perhaps.
Absolutely.
Okay, see, I
Absolutely.
think that I mean, and I'm not trying to protect the person that has done wrong, but I
Right.
think it's really important because I don't think most people would realize that. So that is
Absolutely.
something that I hope people walk away with from this is, if you did wrong, hopefully the justice system, you'll get your turn. But what if you actually turned out to be the victim yourself for
Right.
whatever reason? You need to know what your rights are at that point too.
Absolutely. And I guess that would, besides the impact of, possession and marital property and the mortgage payments, which is just most common question I get asked is also the criminal liability, in the heat of the moment, we say things and we don't always mean them, but we have to be careful. I
Right.
think the biggest thing is take away from this is self-control, self-restraint, count to 10 before you say things that you might regret. And most importantly, absolutely, if there's children involved and this is going to impact your custody for the year to come, it
Yeah.
is very important that you speak to an attorney because there are many options out there
Right.
that can be utilized. There's just no way that I could educate you on all of those in this podcast,
No,
although
no, I
I hope
understand.
to be back. And if in case you get a lot of response and more questions than answers on this podcast. I'd love to talk about it more. I'm very passionate about domestic violence for, two reasons. One is I don't want people harmed. I don't want children to see it. It is a cycle, and until we break it, unfortunately, it's something that will continue to generations to come.
Right.
The second thing is that, it does have grave consequences. And I don't think a lot of people realize what it means and that I can't undo something that has now been in place for 3 months to 6 months. It's actually in the law harder to undo something than it is to do it.
That is what I hear over and over from every attorney that I have on here is,
Well, then I'm telling the truth, Lori.
no, it is that, don't sign anything and, because it is so hard. And I know I have been through a divorce myself. I know how tight money can be when you get in that position, but I've learned so much from these podcasts myself in that you just do not know what you don't know, and you guys do know it. And it is worth the 3, 4, $500, whatever it is that you guys charge for that consult, if you have to borrow it and pay it back maybe when you sell the home, whatever the arrangement would be, it is
Right.
so worth it. It is so worth it. I have become big fans of you guys.
Well, can't say that I've always liked lawyers, but of course, then I started working in the court system and played with lawyers all the time. But what I will say is, if you're going to call somebody to your home for repairs, you want the person that's qualified to do the repairs. This is a system that most people don't understand. I wouldn't expect you to understand. Law is intricate and complicated as well. So, situation may not be, but the ramifications could
Right.
be. And until you know what they are, you're kind of going in blind.
I agree.
Anything that I would, even as a judge, I remember whenever I advised on whether or not, say in criminal matters, because in civil matters, you're not entitled to an attorney.
Mhm.
But majority of the time, in most circumstances, you are in criminal. Maybe I overdid it sometimes, but I just, I would make it a point to sort of stress, like, I really think it would be a good idea for you to speak to an attorney. And I
Right.
know they don't have to listen. That was all I could do. But I think every judge, whenever they say those words, like, I really think you would benefit from speaking to a lawyer, our hands are tied. We're not allowed to advise you on the law, but we understand that clearly there are
Yeah,
things you don't understand. Um,
exactly.
and there are a lot of us out there that, feel like if you would have just talked to someone, maybe you would have been in a different situation.
I mean, honestly, I could verbalize the same thing even using a traditional realtor when selling a house through a divorce versus using a CDRE, a certified divorce real estate expert. There are just things that I know that a traditional realtor doesn't know because I used to be a traditional realtor. So I know the things that I did not know. And I know that I have saved people from divorce disasters when selling their home that, in fact, I would have never asked someone if there was a domestic violence protection order when I was selling a home before because I had no freaking idea what that even was. And that is
Right.
one of the first things I do because I know now it may be part of my process. So I understand exactly what you're saying. I know we could do this all day and we are running out of time. Is there anything that we have skipped that you would like to make sure that people know about? Or do you feel like we kind of got it covered? We got a lot of good information on here.
Well, I hope so. I hope that I was clear because I do forget that this is my language now.
I know. That's
So
why
I,
I
I
try to go back and break it down for those of us that may not understand.
I used to pride myself on speaking the same language, but I'm starting to realize that after 20 years, it is my language, but not
No,
everybody
you did
else's.
a great
What I was
job.
going to say, Lori, is one of the things that connected us, and I think the reason I like you and respect you so much is because we met in a case that
We
was
did.
you know, exceptionally contentious, and you handled it like a champ. And I think it really does goes to show when you understand some of the intricacies of relationships and how that can impact your day with dealing with two individuals who essentially want the same thing, but they demand it their way,
Right.
and sort of settling them down to see that common ground again. It's an art. It really is an art. And I don't know how you managed it in my case, but God bless you, you did. And I think that's, one of the reasons why, I hold your organization so dear and recognize the benefit of utilizing your services, because the truth is that someone who does not come across this on a regular basis would not appreciate some of the conflicts that arise. It could take you months again to fix it rather than just having that right frame of mind and training and knowing how to approach it from the very beginning and making
Yeah,
sure that the boundaries are set so that the goals are met, but that no one is violating any orders. Things are moving in the direction that they need to, and we don't let the personal stuff get in the way of what
right.
really matters, which is getting done what is frustrating these people to begin with.
Exactly. Nope, I
Right.
agree with you 100%. All right. Tell our listeners in case they are not watching, because I'll put all your information at the end if somebody happens to be watching, being able to see the video. But tell our listeners what's the best way for them to get a hold of you if they want to contact you.
CollinsFamilyLaw.com is where I am at. I do work out of Monroe currently, but I live in Mecklenburg. I'm still a charlatan. Having said that, I travel to Aradale, Cabarrus, and the other surrounding counties. Love me some Gaston. Love going there. Good people. So, I can be wherever you need me. I think my experience can be very helpful. Even a conversation, like I said, that consultation could be priceless. CollinsFamilyLaw.com. Paulina
And you
Havelka.
do. I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's
You
okay.
do consider yourself like in the lines of collaborative and mediation. I mean, you would consider yourself a litigator, correct?
Well, I'm not a certified mediator yet. I'm working on that. I do not have collaborative law background, but I understand essentially what it means and what it's trying to accomplish. I can tell you that my moral compass is to help people and put the litigation behind them as quickly as possible, as I know that it all trickles to children, your well-being, stress, and
Right,
everything else. I mean, it just affects every part of
right.
your life. But yeah, I mean, my favorite part was always to be in the courtroom, hence why I served for 4
Well, and
years.
there are some people that listen to this and that's what they're looking for. I mean,
Right,
everybody has there's different attorneys for different people, right? So I
right.
just wanted to kind
I'll
of bring it
fight
out that
I'll
you
fight
do
if I need to, Lori, but I do
exactly.
believe wholeheartedly that for children and your well-being, the quicker the process, the better.
Exactly. Well, I cannot thank you enough for your expertise and you sharing this time with us. You have given us such great information, and I know this is going to help someone out there. It's a really important issue, and I can't thank you enough for your time. So I appreciate it
Thank
so
you for
much.
having me. Yes,
All
ma'am.
right.
I
Talk
enjoyed it.
soon. All
Yes,
right.
ma'am.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The information contained herein is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, please seek an attorney.